Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Music Theory Mondays. Today we're going to be discussing some harmonic analysis. We're going to do a harmonic analysis on the song La Donna Immobile by Giuseppe Verdi. And this is one of the great classical pieces. And I wanted to start on page 2 because this is where things get interesting. So the whole object behind this video is to take the theoretical knowledge in scales and chords that we've already discussed and put it into a practical application so that you can understand and see why knowing this information could be helpful. So this song is in the key of G major, okay? And I'm just going to write that scale for you. Alright, there's your key of G major. Now, the majority of the song is basically a 1 chord to a 5 chord back and forth, which would be a G major chord to a D7 chord, the 1 to 5. But page 2 is where things get harmonically interesting. And we're going to be looking at this first measure here. And to figure out the chord, we have to look at the notes in bass clef. All right, the notes are C sharp, G, and A. Now, if you rearrange those, you get A, C sharp, and G, which outlines an A7 chord. All right, so in this measure, we're dealing with an A7. Now, a 7 chord is the dominant chord of the key, and there's only one dominant chord per key. So the big question is A7 part of the key of G? And if you look at the key of G over here in the notebook, you'll notice that the 5 chord is D7. So this A7 is functioning as a secondary dominant chord because it is not part of the key of G. Usually when you get a dominant chord, it'll either be followed by another dominant chord to resolve, or it will resolve to a major or minor 1. So let's take a look at the next measure. We have a D, an F sharp, and an A. Just going to write that down. That outlines a D major chord. All right? And if you're in the key of D, and I'm going to write this here for you. If you're in the key of D, you will notice that your 5 chord is A. So the A7 is resolving to D, creating a 5-to-1 relationship. All right? Hope everybody's with me so far. If you're not, let me know in the comments. I even offer fairly priced virtual lessons if anybody would like to go in depth with theory, or if they have any questions, feel free to leave that in the comments below. The next measure is a D sharp, an A, and a B. Now, if you rearrange those notes, you end up with B, D sharp, and A, which outlines a B7 chord. Now, if you notice, the A7 and B7 here, they don't have a 5th. And that's because the 5th is the note least important to a 7th chord. Obviously, you need the root, you need the 3rd to distinguish between major and minor, you need the 7th to distinguish between major and minor and to add color, but the 5th is just there to kind of beef it up. You can ignore and omit the 5th anytime you'd like. So the B7, again, I want you to notice we have another dominant chord in the mix, but it is not the 5 of G, right? Because that 5 of G is D, D7. So this 5 chord is probably most likely going to resolve to a one chord of in either a major or minor quality, right? So the next set of notes are E, G, and B right there. Now that is an E minor chord. All right. So this is a 5 to a minor 1. Notice the lowercase 1 for minor, the uppercase 1 for major. So essentially what we have here is what we had over here, but just in a different key. This is a 5 to 1 in the key of D, and then we are quickly modulating to another 5 to 1, but this time it's in the key of E minor. And now we're gonna do 2 more measures for you. We're gonna check out this measure right here, which is an F sharp, C, and a D. If you rearrange those notes, you get D, F sharp, and C, which outlines a D7 chord, which is a nice sign because D7 is the 5 of G and we're in the key of G. So we're finally going to resolve this passage back to this measure with the bass notes being G, B, and D. All right, so there's your 5, D7 to 1, G. Now there's 2 things I want to say about this. The first thing is that these keys that they've chosen to do a 5 to 1 in D, a 5 to 1 in E minor, and a 5 to 1 in G, those aren't necessarily picked at random. The key of D and the key of G, so I'm just going to put D and G, are closely related because the key of G has 1 sharp and the key of D happens to have 2 sharps. So what that means is that they share the most common ingredients amongst each other. In other words, they're almost the same key, starting on a different note. The only difference is that 1 sharp. So the reason they chose the key of D is because it's closely related. The reason they chose the key of E minor is because they are relative to each other, right? The key of E minor and the key of G major have the same notes, just a different starting point. So if you go back to my video on relative keys, if you go up 6 notes in the major, you land on E, you play from E to E, you get E minor. So those are relative. And then of course the last one being the D7 to the G, this just brings it on back home, 5 to 1 in the original key. So I hope that made sense to everybody. You have a 5 to 1 in a key that's closely related to G, you have another 5 to 1 in a key that's relative to G, and then you have the final 5 to 1 in the original key. Thematically, you've got the same type of rhythm occurring in the song, number 1. Number 2, you've got the same chord progression being played over and over in various keys. And number 3, those keys that are being played in are all related to each other in some way. When you put all those ingredients together, you've got a well-written song. A cohesive rhythmic theme, a cohesive tonal center, but also modulating outside of that key to relative keys and closely related keys using the same chord progression, which makes it acceptable to the human ear. That's your harmonic analysis for today, guys. I hope that made sense. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, like, subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.